covered the Russia angle probably more than anybody else in the national press. I have been teased for that a lot. I've been criticized for it. I know that our coverage has squeezed out space and time that we might have devoted to other worthy stories. I know that. I'm totally cognizant of that.
The mainstream media is giving you liberal bias while promising balance. It's a message dictated by liberal advertisers and a slate of programming that's censored for any conservative viewpoint. CRTV is $10 a month. The mainstream media is free. Sounds like you're getting what you paid for.
It says Peter Strzok. And then it says 2, Lisa Page and a whole bunch of other key people at the FBI. So did you write it?
I did write this.
All right, let me ask you a couple questions about it. It has differences from what was given to us by Korn and Simpson. Who's Korn?
Sir, to answer that question, and I would love to answer that question, and if
David Korn.
every part of me, and you know why I'd want to answer that question, because you have this information.
Who's Simpson?
I have been, sir, if I may, I cannot answer that question.
You wrote about it. It's now public. Who's Korn? Who's Simpson?
Based on direction by the FBI, sir, I am not able to answer questions about ongoing investigative.
I think this election is a referendum on President Trump, on the fact that he doesn't represent most Americans, that his values don't line up with most Americans, and so
You're full of shit, bitch. He lines up with mine just fine.
being heard in this election sets the stage for everything in the future.
Do you agree with that his values don't line up with most Americans?
Listen, I think we can have a great debate if our choice is between Gillibrand and Trump. She is for open borders. She is for sanctuary cities. She is against ICE. She represents an absolute total turnaround on gun control. She used to be pro-NRA when she was an upstate New York congresswoman. Once she became a statewide New York senator, she became anti-gun. I think you go down on the list of what she believes in, and that's about 30% of the country. So if I were Trump, I'd say willingly, let's have a debate over these two sets of values. He likes lower taxes and more jobs. She likes higher taxes and more food stamps. Pretty clear choice.
I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
And was that Mr. Wittes?
No, no.
Who was that?
A good friend of mine who's a professor at Columbia. As I said, a combination of things. A gut feeling is an important overlay on but the circumstances that I was alone, the subject matter, and the nature of the person that I was interacting with, and my read of that person. And yeah, and really just a gut feel laying on top of all of that, it's going to be important to protect this organization, that I make records of this.
Oh, is that right? So you and James Brenner both had, let's see, James Brenner had the hair on his neck stand up, and you had a gut feeling. You guys are our Secret Service, our FBI, and you're going on gut feelings and hair standing up on the back of your neck. You have no proof after, what is this point, 11 months, full-blown FBI investigation, NSA, CIA, and you came up with nothing? Now all of a sudden you wanted special counsel? This was corruption, guys. I don't know what your school books are going to teach you in the next 25 years, but this was pure corruption at its best.
And finally, did you show copies of your memos to anyone outside of the Department of Justice?
Yes.
How did you interpret that? And what did you believe he wanted you to do?
I interpret that as he was frustrated that the Russia investigation was taking up so much time and energy. I think he meant of the executive branch, but in the public square in general, and it was making it difficult for him to focus on other priorities of his. But what he asked me was actually narrower than that. So I think what he meant by the cloud, and again, I could be wrong, but what I think he meant by the cloud was the entire investigation is taking up oxygen and making it hard for me to focus on the things I want to focus on.
You know, Jim Comey has a great crystal ball. For somebody who doesn't know President Trump very well, he sure pretends to know how he thinks, what he meant, what his intentions were. For somebody who'd only met the man, what, twice? And let's correct the record on that too. James Comey contacted President Trump first. It was not twice that President Trump called him. The first time Comey had contacted President Trump.
I hope I'll never have another opportunity. Maybe if I did it again, I would do it better.
You described 2 phone calls that you received from President Trump, one on March 30 and one on April 11, where he, quote, described the Russia investigation as a cloud that was impairing his ability, end quote, as president, and asked you, quote, to lift the cloud, end quote. How did you interpret that? And what did you believe he wanted you to do?
I interpret that as he was frustrated that the Russia investigation was taking up so much time and energy. I think he meant of the executive branch.
Well, you know, after 11 months and 4 agencies and thousands of man hours, and you came up with nothing, Mr. Comey, you know, wasn't it time to put it to rest? Well, of course not, because you're a paid motherfucker of Clinton's. And you have been a paid off motherfucker for years. You're a dirty cop. You're the kind of cop that should have been shot in the fucking front seat of your car.
But in the public square in general, and it was making it difficult for him to focus on other priorities of his. But what he asked me was actually narrower than that. So I think what he meant by the cloud, and again,
oh, there he is again. He knows what President Trump meant. He didn't ask him to clarify it so that he could actually make an informed opinion of it. He was going on what he assumed President Trump was talking about.
I could be wrong, but what I think he meant by the cloud was the entire investigation is taking up oxygen and making it hard for me to focus on the things I want to focus on. The ask was to get it out that I, the president, am not personally under investigation.
Do you
and
think
that's
it
what
would
he
be
said.
Reasonable
That's exactly what President Trump said. Look, you need to either shit or get off the pot, dude. And this innuendo that is in the media and all of that, you need to lay it to rest. Any man with any integrity would have done that. But you, being a Clinton boy, remember? Him and Mueller go back, all the way back to Baby Bush.
What's the matter, I guess, would be in the rest of the special terms?
From 1945 and the end of the war through 1989 and the end of the Cold War, we had a worldview. Republican and Democratic presidents alike, from Harry Truman to George Bush, stood for freedom and stood for certain propositions that would make America strong and healthy and grow the middle class and shrink poverty and stand against communism. And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order, and instead it looks like we got a lot of disorder.
You were stark and even a little bit scary in your criticism of his behavior. You said it rose to treason.
I said it was nothing short of treasonous.
In this current controversy, that specific comment has been singled out by a number of people as a comment that maybe by you crossed the line. That was maybe...
Crossed what line?
Well, was it
freedom of speech?
No, I'm not saying you don't have a right to say it. But do you stand by that consideration? And can you explain? Can you elaborate?
Sometimes my Irish comes out, and in my tweets, and I did say that it rises to and exceeds the level of high crimes and misdemeanors, and is nothing short of treasonous. I didn't mean that he committed treason, but it was a term that I used, nothing short of treasonous.
Well, you didn't mean that he committed treason, though.
I said it's nothing short of treasonous. That was the term that I used, yeah.
That's the... If we diagram the sentence, nothing short of treasonous means it's treason. Do you think that he is knowingly serving the interests of the Russian government instead of the U.S. government?
You know, I scratch my head a lot. I'm puzzled over why Mr. Trump acts this way with such obsequiousness to Mr. Putin. I don't know. And I'm not going to try to...
You also said you were struck by what they didn't ask.
Very much. No one, to my recollection, asked, so what what's coming next from the Russians? How might we stop it? What's the future look like? It was all, what can we say about what they did and how it affects the election that we just had?
Comey then asked to meet alone with Trump to warn him about that now infamous Steele dossier, unverified information on Trump's ties to Russia, including allegations of Trump's encounters with prostitutes in Moscow.
I'm about to meet with a person who doesn't know me, has just been elected President of the United States by all accounts, and from my watching him during the campaign, could be volatile. And I'm about to talk to him about allegations that he was involved with prostitutes in Moscow and that the Russians taped it and have leverage over him.
It's obvious that he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's obvious he can't control his mind or his tongue. And what I've suggested, if now, because he's the nominee for the party, and he's entitled to briefings from the CIA, for example, I said publicly, give him fake briefings. Pretend you're briefing him. Don't tell him anything that you don't want to get out. And that's how I feel about it. I think that the man is a loose cannon. I think he's done so much to hurt our country with our international relations already.
But as a Republican nominee, isn't he entitled to get those briefings?
Give him fake briefings.
What does that even mean?
It means they'll tell him stuff. He won't know the difference.
You're basically telling the intelligence community to lie to him.
No, I'm not going to lie to you, but I still have to tell you everything.
Why, if this was salacious, and this particular part of the dossier unverified, still unverified, by the way?
Yes. So far as when I got fired, it was unverified.
Did you tell him that the Steele dossier had been financed by his political opponents?
No. I didn't think I used the term Steele dossier. I just talked about additional material.
But did he have a right to know that?
That had been financed by his political opponents? I don't know the answer to that. It wasn't necessary for my goal, which was to alert him that we had this information.
How graphic did you get?
I think as graphic as I needed to be. I started to tell him about the allegation was that he had been involved with prostitutes in a hotel in Moscow in 2013.
Does Donald Trump not represent this modern Republican Party?
No, I think he represents the modern Republican Party. I would disagree with the president. And I've said many times, I've given major speeches on the reason we have Donald Trump is because of what has happened in the Congress of the United States by the Republicans. They are the ones that created the birthright issue that Trump has picked up on. They're the ones that have been hammering anti-immigration. They're the ones that have been doing things to try to denigrate African-American president. They've gone after women and many. It's obvious that he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's obvious he can't control his mind or his tongue. And what I've suggested, if now, because he's the nominee for the party, and he's entitled to briefings from the CIA, for example, I said publicly, give him fake briefings. Pretend you're briefing him. Don't tell him anything that you don't want to get out. And that's how I feel about it. I think that the man is a loose cannon. I think he's done so much to hurt our country with our international relations already.
But as a Republican nominee, isn't he entitled to get those briefings?
Give him fake briefings.
What does that even mean?
It means they'll tell him stuff. He won't know the difference.
You're basically telling the intelligence community to lie to him.
No, I'm not going to lie to you, but I still have to tell you everything.
We've been pushing all along. Sandra, we started 1 year ago this month calling for a second special counsel. I don't like special counsels, but I see no other remedy. How does the FBI investigate themselves? How does the DOJ investigate themselves? I mean, think about this. Rod Rosenstein is overseeing an investigation by Mr. Mueller looking at possible obstruction of justice into the firing of James Comey, and Rod Rosenstein wrote the memo recommending the firing of James Comey. So when have you ever seen... Think about this fact. Think about this. I've never seen this in a federal agency. James Comey's been fired. Andy McCabe has been fired, lied 3 times under oath, faces a criminal referral. Jim Rubicki, chief of staff, has left the FBI. James Baker, former chief counsel, was demoted, then left the FBI. Lisa Page, FBI counsel, was demoted, then left the FBI. Peter Strzok, deputy head of counterintelligence, demoted, lost his clearance for a while, and is still at the FBI. When have you ever seen 6 key people in a federal agency that ran the 2 most important investigations, the Clinton investigation and the Trump-Russia investigation? When have you ever seen that happen?
General Clapper, on March the 5th, 2017, you said the following to a question. Here's the question. Does intelligence exist that can definitely answer the following question? Where there were improper contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian officials, you said. We did not include any evidence in our report, and I say our, that's the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, with my office, the Director of National Intelligence, that had any reflection of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. There was no evidence of that included in our report. Chuck Todd then asked, I understand that, but does it exist? You say, no, not to my knowledge. Is that still accurate?
It is.
And Mueller had the relationship, we know, with Director Comey, James Comey, who we also are learning today. There's a report that he basically, was drafting a letter of pardon, not willing to investigate Hillary Clinton, and he hadn't even talked to her, hadn't interviewed any of her aides, that he was going to let it all go. So all of this seems to point to certain people in Washington who seem to have it out for Donald Trump.
And we're protecting Hillary Clinton. In the case of Comey, he began drafting his statement allegedly exonerating Hillary Clinton, at least from a criminal charge, back in May and April before his July statement. And that was before 17 witnesses had been interviewed, including Hillary Clinton. It explains why they were handing out immunity agreements like candy, because it was a make-believe investigation at that point, because like Alice in Wonderland, Comey had come to his decision and the investigation would follow.
2016, 1,976 megabytes of data were downloaded from the DNC server. On July 10th, 2016, in Washington, D.C., a police van was broken into and a locked gun box containing several weapons was stolen. Despite a hefty reward for these guns, they've never been found. But a few blocks away that very same night, DNC employee Seth Rich was shot twice in the back and died later at the hospital from his injuries. Nothing was stolen from Seth Rich that night, yet his death was labeled by the police as a botched robbery.
Just this past Sunday, a young man, Seth Rich, who worked for the Democratic National Committee to expand voting rights, was shot and killed in his neighborhood in Washington.
On July 22, 2016, WikiLeaks released 19,252 emails which exposed DNC corruption and that they had rigged the primaries in Hillary Clinton's favor. This means that anyone who donated to Bernie Sanders' campaign or believed in democracy was literally and figuratively robbed by Hillary Clinton.
Then party chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz stepped down in July of 2016 after WikiLeaks exposed emails showing a party bias against Sanders. The lawsuit says the DNC server may contain information that proves the claims of bias. The attorney also says the server could help solve the murder of DNC staff member and known Sanders supporter Seth Rich and whether he was involved in leaking DNC emails.
The overriding issue that affected the election that I had any control over, because I had no control over the Russians, was the way that the use of my email account was turned into, the biggest scandal since Lord knows when. This was the biggest nothing burger ever.
The DNC immediately blamed a Russian hacker named Gustafer 2.0, who said that he hacked from Romania. Yet the FBI did not investigate their server, and instead the DNC hired a private company called CrowdStrike to investigate this and pin the whole thing on Russia, meaning that no U.S. government entity has run an independent forensic analysis on the DNC server, and they're just taking a third-party source at their word. Which makes us ask the question, where is the DNC server, and why didn't the FBI take possession of it? Deep state? And the Russian hacking narrative doesn't even make sense, because the download speed of the emails was shown to be 22.7 megabytes per second. This speed would have been unattainable in 2016 unless the download was executed locally with a flash drive or similar. It would have been impossible to have a transoceanic transfer to Romania at those speeds, meaning that the DNC couldn't possibly have been hacked, and these emails had to have been leaked from the inside by someone who had access to the DNC's computers. Now, at this time, there were only 2 DNC employees that worked in data. and one of those people was Seth Rich. Now, Seth Rich's parents have tried to shut down the WikiLeaks narrative after Brad Bauman, a professional DNC crisis PR consultant, became the family spokesman. Bauman has claimed that he was doing this job pro bono.
Are you doing this pro bono? I am. You are.
Okay. WikiLeaks put out a $20,000 reward for any information leading to the conviction of Seth Rich's killer. Why would Julian Assange do that if Seth Rich was just a normal DNC employee who died in a botched robbery?
Whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material and often very significant risks. There's a 27-year-old that works for the DNC who was shot in the back, murdered just 2 weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington. So
that was just a robbery, I believe, wasn't it?
No, there's no finding. So
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting? But was he one of your sources then? I mean,
millionaire and famous programmer Kim.com also claimed that Seth Rich was the WikiLeaks source.
It is not Russia that hacked the DNC. It is their very own conduct that an individual was so unhappy with, thought it was so unfair and dishonest and unethical that that person decided, I want the truth to be known. This is how we get the truth. It's people on the inside.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh, on a secret recording, also said through his investigation he knows that Seth Rich was in contact with WikiLeaks.
Shot a place in the back with a .22 small caliber. This is according to the FBI report. What they find is that he makes contact with WikiLeaks. That's in his computer, and he makes contact. WikiLeaks did get the password. He had a Dropbox.
And if that's still not enough for you, a report from a group of graduate students and instructors from the Forensic Psychology Department at George Washington University stated through their investigation that Seth Rich's death did not appear to be a homicide or a robbery gone bad, and that it was most likely committed by a hired killer or a serial murderer, and that the resolution of prosecuting the individuals responsible appeared to be hindered both actively and passively, meaning that this was most likely a hit job and it was seemingly being covered up. At this point, there's almost $500,000 in reward money leading to an arrest. If these were just some low-level thieves or a small gang, you would think that someone would have ratted them out by now to claim that cash. Yet 2 years after his murder, we're still left without any answers. There's no ballistics report, there's no forensic report, there's no toxicology report, there's no body cam or security footage, even though the police were wearing body cams that night, and there's security cameras all down that street. It's basically a cold case at this point. Yet independent investigators are still looking into this, which brings us to earlier this week when Jack Berkman held a conference where a man who claims to be a witness gave his story. Now, Jack Berkman is a bit of an odd character, but the strangest thing about him in the story is that in March, a former investigator he hired to help find Seth Rich's murderer, named Kevin Doherty, shot Berkman and ran him over with an SUV.